Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 928 for February 23rd, 2022, featuring our happy hour live webcast from the other night with Lance Winters and Dave Smith of St. George Spirits in Alameda, California. St. George is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year and was one of the pioneers of the U.S. craft distilling movement. Thanks as always to our presenting sponsors of WhiskyCast, Redbreast and Dewar's, for making our Friday night live shows possible each week, along with the segment sponsors on each week's WhiskyCast, Scarabus, Writer's Tears, Sagamore Spirit, Mortlock, Catoctin Creek, and the Dalmore. One final note, we don't bleep certain words on the live webcasts, and during our live show Friday night, Lance and Dave used a few words that you might not want your kids or co-workers to hear. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about American single malts this hour or so, and it really is a thing that we've seen over the last, maybe 5 to 7 years with American single malts. But the guys that we're talking to today have been making American single malts for 20 plus years this year. As of this year, let's bring in Lance Winters and Dave Smith from St. George Spirits in Alameda, California. Guys, how are you today?
Doing great, Mark. How are you doing today?
Just great. I am drinking your batch 21 of your St. George single malt. And tell us about this one, because this was really one of the original batch one was done way back in 82, right?
Actually, the batch one, so 82 is when the distillery was founded, and we were an eau-de-vie distillery. I showed up 26 years ago now? Yeah, 26 years ago.
This month.
Yeah, 26 years ago this month. Actually, like February 15th, I think was my 26th anniversary year. And I showed up with the desire to make a single malt whiskey. And as I spoke with Jorg, the founder of the distillery, about that, it became clear that the best way for us to be able to do this, and the philosophy that was sort of the St. George philosophy that was growing at the time, was to be able to create something that nobody had seen before in the whiskey category. And the way to do that as an eau-de-vie distiller is to try and make a whiskey that is layered and complex and compelling without ever hitting a barrel. And the way that you go about doing that is not the way that it had been done for generations in the past, but by starting to incorporate more heavily roasted grains. Typically what you're going to find in a whiskey are very, very fermentable grains. Most distillery managers that are making whiskey are paid their bonuses based on how many liters of alcohol they can produce given a certain number of bushels of grain. So efficiency is the name of the game there. For us, being able to be full flavored from the get-go. So two-row pale, which is the workhorse of the fermentable content for the barleys. But then crystal malt, the malt that's going to give you that really beautiful roasted nut and reddish hue to an amber ale. And then chocolate malt and black patent malt, which give you really, really beautiful roast, chocolatey coffee characteristics. And then Bamberg malt, which is a smoked malt from Germany that's smoked over alder and beechwood, takes it in a very, very different direction. So that was our initial point of differentiation. And then years later, when Dave showed up at the distillery and started learning more and more about the process, he took the reins for guiding the whiskey into different barrel types and selecting barrels. And the whiskey really took a quantum leap forward as far as complexity and flavor goes at that point. I'm going to leave it over to you.
Thank you for the kind words there. I'm going to mark my calendar that you gave me a compliment. That was amazing.
I'll sign it.
What I want to say though is, as you talk about that, I'm just reminded that you I think are arguably the first person to approach American single malt as a brewer, as a craft brewer with that sort of sensibility, and to really try to open those doors. And we talk about this idea of originality here at St. George Spirits, because you're approaching this from the concept of not wanting to make a single malt that you could try anywhere else. It's got to be something that's genuinely unique to what your vision was going back 25, 26 years now. And as you start to lay down those first casks and to try to develop a mash bill for a single malt, that would actually be a statement piece. It's not a Japanese style of single malt. It's not a Canadian. It's not a Scotch. It's not Irish. It really has to be something of us, of St. George Spirits, and sort of our perspective, our point of view of what we bring to it. And then to that end, we used Cask Types for this Lot 21 release. We chose 26 individual casks, the youngest of which was 4.5 years old. The oldest single cask was 10 years old. And then there were casks that were sort of our own sort of super blends we put together over the years that had whiskeys going back, 22 years in some of those casks. Aging profiles between used Kentucky bourbon cask, Tennessee rye cask, some American and French oak wine cask. We had some of our agricole rum casks in there as well. So we make some agricole rum in these parts. And then finally, also a California style Sauterne cask, which is really one of our most beloved favorite weapons to use in blending whiskey.
It's the distiller's version of candy. You don't want to have candy for every single meal, but actually you want to. You shouldn't. And we're so drawn to those barrels because they're so complementary to the style of whiskey that we're producing as well. I mean, that sweetness overlaying all of the other sweet malty characteristics that are coming through just really pulls them all together and provides a really lovely top note to the whole picture.
I remember you actually tried this California style Sauterne wine 20 years ago now, probably.
Yeah, it was probably closer to 23 years ago at this point. Yeah. And
you're like, immediately you had that sort of black cat Friday the 13th moment, as you told me the story before, which just had a sense of like you're smelling this wine, you're tasting it, it's this great moment. And you're thinking, oh my God, I need this for the whiskey. Like this has something to say. This is something that will come together. Like I need to chase this down. And then it took another 10 years to start, maybe 12 years to start getting barrels out of that particular winery.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Lance, I want you to tell us about that initial job interview with Jorg Vroop, who founded St. George back in 1982. Yeah,
you bet. Job interviews around here are always interesting. We can jump into Dave's too, because that was a fun one. But I had been very, very interested in making whiskey. I was a brewer. I started as a home brewer,
and then reformed nuclear engineer who took the natural career path of becoming a brewer.
It's better to split beers than to split atoms. And while I was brewing, a friend of mine gave me a bottle of Lagavulin. It was my introduction to actual great quality whiskey. I'd always been passed bottles of whiskey at parties before, and it was just a quicker pathway to having a horrible night. That Lagavulin was something where suddenly I understand that there can be a story in my glass, and it's not a story somebody needs to tell me. It's a story that I can smell and I can taste. And I was blown away by it and learned about whiskey making and realized that I really wanted to do this. I had done a couple small batches of whiskey at home, which I now recognize was probably not legal. And not in the strictest sense of the law.
I like that you use the term.
Oh, in any sense of the law, but the statute of limitations has expired.
Well, I don't think I said where I lived at the time either. So it might have been a country that it was legal in. But I knew of St. George Spirits. I knew Jorg by reputation, nothing else. And one day showed up on his doorstep with a bottle of my homemade whiskey as my CV, and sat down to talk with him. And we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about work ethics, things like that. But I put the bottle of whiskey on the table, and he poured out a glass, gave it a nose, looked around, and just said, "That's inoffensive." I was heartbroken because to me, inoffensive is like, "Hey, nice try, kid, but swing and a miss." And it wasn't until about 2 years later where I had heard Jorg say that enough times about things that he himself had distilled. He was just he still is. He's a person who has very exacting standards and applies those to everything that he does. And so the greatest gift that we all have here at the distillery to this day is we each have a little Jorg on our shoulder who is whispering in our ears, is that actually good enough? And it's what drives us, and it drives quality here.
Yeah, you that's your best work. If you get an inoffensive from York, you should be high-fiving. You just landed a person on the moon. This is very exciting news.
Yeah, that's a 9.5 from the Russian judges.
Yeah.
We don't want to comment about Russian judges right now with the way the Winter Olympics have been going.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Dave, tell us about your job interview. What did you bring as your CV?
Yeah.
He actually brought a resume.
I'm a reformed English teacher. That resume was tight. It was perfect. It was one page. All of the salient details were there. I had a tie. Lance took one look at me wearing a tie as I came into the distillery, went into his office, and he smirked, kind of giggled. I gave him this resume, and I'll tell you what, this guy basically looks at it for a second and throws it over his shoulder. And I think, I'm dead in the water. I'm not going to get this job. That's my best work. He's going to actually want to talk to me. I'm going to have to answer questions. Like, the best parts of me were in that resume. And we went through. We talked about work ethic. We talked about sort of what we cared about. I had been told about Lance and about York. Met him briefly through the industry as my brother's a winemaker, and have had a great opportunity to learn about the wine industry and a bit of cellar science with my brother Matt. And I had been told by another winemaker that Lance and York were looking for some help over at St. George. Dave, have you talked to Lance over at St. George yet? You've got, pardon my language for this, but Dave, you've got kind of a fucked up black sense of humor. You should really talk to Lance. I think you guys would really get along famously. And lo and behold, got this interview and sat down with Lance. Lance, do you remember what you asked me during that interview?
I do. So Dave had spent a lot of time working with his brother at his brother's winery, and I really needed somebody full time. I didn't want somebody who was going to come in, work part time, and then say, "Oh, I really need to go work at my brother's winery because it's harvest." I need your total loyalty. I need to know that I can trust that I have your loyalty. And I said, I may ask for some proof of that loyalty at some point. May ask you to kill your brother. And Dave, without skipping a beat, what did you say?
Fuckers had it coming for a long time. Now, in my head, I really was evaluating. I was thinking through. I was thinking, do you drop an F-bomb in this interview? I was thinking of all the time, the hardship that my brothers put me through with taking the air out of my water wings as I was learning to swim, being the monster actually hiding under my bed.
Grabbing my ankles
as I jumped out of bed, nooses around my teddy bear. I mean, we're all kinds of fantastic, emotional, spiritual, physical abuse.
You really had it covered.
I processed a lot very quickly and decided that fucker's had it coming for a long time. At which point, Lance stood up and I stood up and we shook hands and he said, "You're hired."
Okay, congratulations, you're part of the family. Yeah. And I've made a lot of really dumb decisions at different points in my life, but I would not file that one under that. I was able to bring a brother on board who's somebody who's got a great sense of humor, a great talent for blending, a great nose, and just all around good guy. So very, very lucky.
But was the resume inoffensive?
Just to finish the thought, I can't imagine my life any other way. So I've been fortunate to, there's the family we're born with and that I love deeply. And then there's a family we choose in life. And, so terribly fortunate to have been chosen and to have chosen this family here. It's really extraordinary.
Most of us have to move hundreds of miles away from family to find a real family.
or just to find sanity.
That's
A great question from Tyrone Cotillard, pal up in Nova Scotia, where the winds are blowing tonight. He wants to know where your single malt sits on the scale between bourbon, Irish whiskey, and non-peated Scotch whiskeys in terms of taste.
It's a really good question. I'm going to jump in if I may. I'd say we're probably between non-peated Scotch and Irish whiskey in a lot of ways, and those ways I'll say would be approachability and softness. But at that point, the similarities stop, because there are a lot of things that the various roast levels in grain bring into the picture for us that you won't find in typical Irish whiskey or non-peated Scotch. To wit, some of the characteristics that you'll get from the chocolate malt and black patent malt. There's a big punch of dry, dusty cocoa that comes through in this. The other side of this is that we use brewer's yeast instead of distiller's yeast. Distiller's yeast is very efficient at converting starches. It's very fast, and it allows a distiller at an industrial scale to very rapidly perform a fermentation and get something into the still. Less time wasted. That stuff goes into the barrel faster. It's going to get out faster. For us, utilizing those brewer's yeast gives us more beautiful nuances, and we get a lot more fruit character that comes through from that fermentation. And when you're working with grain, being able to get something beyond the pale, beyond that grain character, is so vitally important. So that's where I'd say that we are, with maybe a few distinctions outside of that. Dave, you want to add anything?
No, I think that does a great job. And it's you kind of started off on this component of you showed up here with a love and a desire to make whiskey and have it with a brewer's background. But the distillery itself is a 40-year-old distillery founded in 1982 by an eau de vie distiller. And so eau de vie distilling is very focused on the raw materials, as you're describing all these basically grain profiles. Ultimately, I almost think of a whiskey, the base spirit, before we start aging anything. This is an eau de vie. This is sort of a celebration of that barley to begin with. And then the other component here is not only the yeast strain, it's time, it's temperature. I could use the exact same yeast strain, and we could have different fermentation sciences applied, different kind of concepts applied to it, and we can get completely different characteristics, aromatics from that same base material from that barley, dependent on not just the yeast strain, but also the time and the temperature that it's fermenting at. And so really trying to be mindful, really trying to own every part of the process, and I would argue be obsessive compulsive about all of those little finite details that ultimately will influence the final product is sort of vital to us, whether we're making a pear brandy or a single malt whiskey or absinthe or gins or anything beyond that as well.
I want to dig deeper into this yeast question, we think of yeast as basically Saccharomyces cerevisiae, if I've got my Latin right on that. But there are many different strains of that yeast strain, of that major yeast family, that really make the difference here, don't they? Absolutely.
And each one has a reasonably unique thumbprint that they leave behind on something. We're very, very careful in the yeast that we select for different things because of that. When we're working with pears, for example, we use a yeast strain that's colloquially known as Prix de Mousse. Its numerical moniker, or alphanumeric, is EC1118, and it tends to Guten Abend, Prem. It's a yeast strain that ends up giving really beautiful, fresh, cut green apple qualities. When we're working with raspberries, we work with a yeast strain that I think is SM23.
Yeah, it's one of them.
It's a Pinot Noir strain that gives more great berry character. And so each of those yeast strains is very, very specially selected. There's a yeast strain that we've worked with on some other whiskeys, our non-lot series, that we really, really love, that is called Seyfale SO4. And it just does really, really beautiful things. I've had many arguments with academics about how it doesn't make any difference at all, and it makes a huge one. We worked with, I think it was White Labs, about maybe 10 years ago on a project right around the time of Tales of the Cocktail, where they brewed a batch of beer and fermented it with 10 different yeast strains, the exact same mash. And then we distilled each of them, and we saw different characteristics that came over in that distillation. So I think it's an interesting analog, because it's personality. Each of those yeasts has a different personality, and it puts it on that spirit. And that's what we're trying to do with the things that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's that distiller's yeast strain that you described, and it's something that's hyper efficient. But do this quick hot fermentation, it's hyper efficient. You will absolutely take any sugars that are fermentable and turn them into alcohol. But we have to look at that as a missed opportunity. It's an opportunity to help further develop what those basic ingredients are and to help allow them to show themselves in a really, really unique and intentional way that speaks to those raw materials. Ultimately, distillation is oftentimes I feel like it's confused with an idea of purification. And I think that's the exact opposite of everything we strive for here. Distillation is a celebration of those raw materials. We want to showcase exactly what these spirits start out as a base understanding of that agriculture.
Yeah, we want to be able to distill over just all the right impurities.
Yeah. Love it.
Got a great comment from Dave Kuhn down in Atlanta. One of his summer party traditions is to put a bottle of St. George single malt in a cooler and sip the cool whiskey straight from the bottle amongst our friends. Very refreshing with tons of cool spearmint. How do you get that spearmint note?
I am going to just start off by giving a virtual high five to Dave for that's a baller move, man. A lot of respect. That spearmint note, I want to just make sure we know which type of whiskey, which one of our whiskeys Dave is sipping from. Is the
St. George.
Yes, and it sounds like the lot series. So,
yeah.
So I think some of that is sort of a menthol quality that can come from some of the barrel breakdown, especially in the older barrels. You start to get some of that. That's going to be the most likely culprit for that. And while I love just not being fussy about the whiskey, keep it cool, but throw it into a glass. Let it open up a little bit. You get even more out of it than just that. And I think that cooling it does shift that profile and gets you into that spearmint place. Some of the softer aromatics and softer flavors are going to be toned down because of that temperature change. But I think that's largely a barrel characteristic.
Dave, you mentioned baller move, and we need to talk about your baller whiskey because Dave loves the concept of baller, a whiskey made for highballs. With this, he says it adds this interesting umami note that makes all the sense when you know the story behind it. Tell us about baller.
Baller started out as a conversation. It started out as an inspiration. Drinking, as you might imagine, drinking highballs at our friend's ramen shop here in Oakland, and it's aptly named
The Ramen Shop.
Yep, very, very well named. And we're enjoying these bowls of ramen. I mean, that's miso pork belly ramen, super fatty, savory. And we're drinking highballs there. Was it Hakushu? Or
I think it was Hibiki.
Yeah. Thank you. It was Hibiki highballs. And life is good. We're having a meal with friends and family, friends who are like family. And everything's perfect with the world. And a highball, especially at that point, is almost like operates like a light beer. Very often, like spirits pairing and a meal is probably not our favorite thing to do. But a highball is sort of this refreshing light beer almost relative to that deep, rich, fatty bowl of ramen. And as we're sipping this, we start talking about the concept of Japanese whiskeys and what we love about Japanese whiskeys and what we find inspiring there. Started to turn into an idea of these are our friends. This is our friend's ramen shop, and we're not drinking anything that we've made here while we're enjoying life. And Lance and I came back to the shop the next day and started hassling through the barrels. And we've had over the years, we've got sort of our primary whiskey focus in the lot series, but we've done a lot of experimentation over the years with different mash bills, different yeast strains, and we started to explore some of the lighter styles of whiskey we had made. And what I mean by that is that Lance described all that, the Bamberg malt, the chocolate malt, the crystal malt, all of those deep, rich malts that are part of the lot series mash bill. We had some other mash bills, some other whiskeys in barrel that were much lighter, where it's 2-row pale and there's some Munich malt in there. So it's just kind of like number 3 on your toaster. It's super, super light, and found some whiskeys that really would speak well in a highball. Our lot series is robust enough that I don't think it would make the best highball you're ever going to have. Baller, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to say one of the characteristics that you're looking for in a highball when you're working with something like a really rich pork broth in a bowl of ramen is something that's got some sharpness and some leanness, and it's going to cut through that fat. If you start working with a very chocolatey, rich, sweet style of whiskey, it doesn't provide that balance. And so going to the lighter style of whiskey that we found in that one barrel was the way to go.
Absolutely, and it's something that was it's a little bit lighter, fruitier, more stone fruit in nature, just naturally. And again, that's going to come back to some of the yeast strains, all those the choices that went into the mash itself. And then with that baller, we started working with some maple hardwood smoked charcoal to just sort of change the shape and tone and texture of some of the smoke content that's here to really allow that to speak. And what is very much a low proof, a low ABV cocktail in a highball. And then Lance had one of his ideas on what else we could do to make this project more St. George. And what I mean by that is simply we played around with some whiskey casks. We had a lovely blend. We had something that I thought really spoke to the balance of what you can find in an American whiskey that's inspired by Japanese whiskey. And as a side project, as we often have here, there was some umeshu in the lab. Umeshu is using shochu. So in this case, it was a spirit distilled from rice that it had its enzymatic conversion using koji. And then California ground fruit, which is a sort of almost like a small, I describe it sort of as a citrusy apricot kind of fruit, but a small stone fruit. And we had been soaking some ume fruit with shochu and rock sugar for probably at least 5 or 6 months at that point. And Lance, what did you do one morning? You came into the shop after we had labels for Baller, we had glass for Baller, we had some of the whiskey blended up. We're feeling like I've got something that's worthwhile and beautiful. What did you do?
I tried an experiment. I as one does. Mark, you probably do this too. I mean, and I'm sure that many people in your viewing audience do this. I took a glass, I poured some umeshu into that glass, gave it a little rinse, emptied it out, and then poured some of the Baller that was ready to be bottled into it and smelled it, just to sort of determine what that little kiss of umeshu would do and simulate barrel finishing in an umeshu barrel. And I tasted it and I'm like, wow, that's good. It's really good. And I brought that glass over to Dave and I said, Dave, you got to try this. And Dave tried it. And I think we've used profanity enough on your show.
Go ahead. End this way.
But Dave was very angry at me, and for all the right reasons and wrong reasons.
Angry is the right word to use, but it's for the right reasons. Because once the idea is out there, once you know the way that something should be made, we can never go back.
Yeah, and only angry because of the fact that it was going to push us back from releasing this whiskey by about a year, because we had to get ume fruit, we had to make umeshu, we had to then put that umeshu in a barrel and then take it out and then give the whiskey time to be able to rest in that barrel to pick up enough of that character. But what it does is it really helps to round it out. It gives this beautiful, bright, tart stone fruit kiss to the whole picture. And makes it, I think, an unforgettable whiskey. And one of the things that we've got to look at here is this is an under 4-year-old whiskey, and yet it's complex, it's beautiful, it's one of my favorite things to drink. So it's a lot of fun.
And Dave also wants to know, what does the Japanese language characters on the label mean, and what did you tell the TTB it means?
Well, what we told the TTB is exactly what it does mean, because what we wanted to have some stuff on there that was Japanese. There was a part of me that wanted this label to be all in Japanese and just have like a little over sticker that made it feel like it was an import. But I didn't want it to come off like we're really trying to knock off a Japanese product. But what it says is St. George single malt, made in California. And you can back that up with Google Translate on your phone. I've tried it on the camera app, and it works out pretty well. So, but that's exactly what it says.
And the artwork itself is sort of a reimagining the St. George, Knight Templar, but reimagining him as a samurai, slaying a dragon to save a barrel of whiskey. That you actually managed to work with a local artist. You sort of came up with the concept, sketched it out, and then worked with the local artist who did some of Jorg's very first labels back in 1982 for some of his earliest ODV releases.
Yeah, Sylvia Solicek, who's a really brilliant woodcut artist, had done a number of watercolors for early St. George labels for the ODVs, and I had asked her, because she's very, very well tapped into the community here, the artist community, had asked her for some recommendations, and she said, "I'll do it." And I said, "No, you won't. You're too busy. You're too important. You're too fancy. We can't afford you." And she's like, just give me the fucking drawing. I'm going to do it. And like 2 days later, she calls me over to her studio, and she's got 3 separate thumbnail sketches of what I wanted to have in different color studies. And she said, "Which one do you like?" I'm like, "That one." And she said, "Great, come back in 2 days. I'll have a full size for you." And she just nailed it. And it's so nice to be able to work with people who have that level of vision and talent. She's really great.
Well, I will admit that, and as Dave Kuhn points out, this is not something you would give someone trying to get into whiskey, but I really never quite understood what umami tasted like until I tasted this. And that sort of gave me finally I understood what umami is, thanks to you guys.
Happy to be here for you. And what's interesting is that, like, on just a pure volumetric standpoint, the amount of the umeshu and then the shochu that's in there is very, very small. But the shochu is such a huge driver of umami, because you think about the koji, which is a fungus that is applied to the rice to be able to get the starch conversion that Dave was talking about earlier. It smells obviously very earthy. It smells like a mushroom, but it also smells like cashews, like cocoa, like pistachios. There's a lot of really, really beautiful umami character to that. And there's enough of it that even when you've got a tiny, tiny coating of that coming through, it really jumps.
Well, it speaks to it's one more point. It's one more opportunity to shape a product that we're making that then will shape a secondary product, which then shapes a tertiary product, as we're sort of creating that shochu to then create umeshu that we're barrel aging, to then empty the umeshu out of barrel and finish some of the baller whiskey in those umeshu casks.
Yeah, I think maybe the one thing that we love more than drinking a well-crafted spirit is process and getting into that process. There was a question back there. I think the gentleman's name was Mark. Was it Mark Mariner?
Malt Mariner's out of Germany.
Okay, all right. Malt Mariner. Sorry, I'm. These don't always work, and the things behind them don't always work. But the question about whether or not shochu is a spirit that's fermented, something that's fermented with spit. There were some rice wines, rice spirits that utilized the enzymes in spit. There were women would sit and chew some of the rice and then spit it into a vat. I think a lot of different cultures actually had something like that. But shochu traditionally, and as we're working with, is one where we're utilizing the Aspergillus niger, which is the fungus that actually affects the conversion process.
I am jealous of Malt Mariner because I have never tried the Unjaba Namibian whiskey dried over elephant dung. I've tried Icelandic whiskey dried over sheep dung, but never African whiskey dried over elephant dung. I've got to try that. That sounds interesting.
You're both way ahead of me.
Yeah.
And Tyrone Cote, our pal in Nova Scotia, wants to know if you guys have ever compared notes with the guys at Two Brewers in the Yukon.
Don't believe so.
No,
not yet.
No, but we'll have to do that. Tyrone, why should we do that?
I will tell you exactly why you should do it, because they started out as brewers themselves, and they still run a brewery in Whitehorse, Yukon. We've had Bob Baxter, one of the founders, on the show before, and what they did was they started making whiskey for themselves, and they waited 7 full years before they actually put anything into a bottle and tried to sell it.
Right on.
And they've been making some amazing Canadian single malts.
They sound like they're very process-driven already.
Yeah, and they sound like exactly like guys that you should be sharing notes with.
Sounds great. I love to find out about people like that, and even more love to meet people like that.
Yeah.
And there are those who would think that you guys ought to be a little bit envious of all the attention being paid to American single malts these days because of folks like Westland in Seattle, Cedar Ridge in Iowa, and all these folks that are getting a lot of attention, when you guys have been making single malt since 20 years ago, for crying out loud.
97.
Yeah. I think there's enough attention to go around, and one of the things that this segment should be about is different people jumping in and expressing different viewpoints. And I think Dave Kuhn's point about and as well as yours, Mark, about the baller not being somebody's introduction to whiskey. Everybody has their own things that they're after in a whiskey, and the baller won't be all things to all drinkers. And that's why it's great that there are people from Ames, Iowa, or what have you, making whiskeys, because hopefully they'll be expressing something new, some new point of view that nobody's tasted before. And there will be all these great new conversations in a bottle, if you will, that we can all be enjoying. I welcome and embrace all the people who are doing this for the right reasons. I welcome and embrace people who are doing it because it's a way for them to express themselves and to bring something new into the distilling community.
But what are the wrong reasons for doing it?
Just chasing a buck. It's like it's like the wrong reason for doing pretty much anything. Do it because it's something you're going to enjoy. Because at the end of the day, people are going to really appreciate sensing your enjoyment in that product. And if it fails as a commercial endeavor, at least you still had a good time. The wrong reasons are because it's a category that's experienced double-digit growth year over year for the last 20 years. Who gives a shit? That's not a valid reason to become a distiller. You become a distiller because you love spirits and you want to add something to that community.
I mean, obviously we're on the same page here, but I mean, it's something where I think anyone who has a creative bone, anyone who's going to engage in some sort of creative activity, stop it. But any concept on that though really has to be not just because you love to do it. It's because you don't know how not to do it. You have to express this in some way. I know for myself, I never imagined that distillation would be an art form that I would embrace. Before coming to St. George, I didn't know what distillation was other than some sort of black magic. And it was something that I found a way to create conversations, worlds, concepts, and pathways that I had never explored before. And now I can't imagine not having the ability to do that, not having that as a pathway. And so it's something where I think, to your point on it, it's probably one of those areas where I think every one of our spirits that we have here at St. George, we have more spirits than we have employees overall. And it's something where every one of those is very personal to us. It's come from a story. It's influenced by a story. There's no version of this where we're saying, you guys, the demographics say that we need to have a blueberry X, whiskey tomorrow.
Yeah, our focus group says kiwi strawberry is the next big thing.
Big thing. Antioxidants and kiwi strawberry. We got to attack it.
Yeah, if you see us putting acai berries in our whiskey, just shoot us, okay?
Or an NFT, right?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Not going to do that anytime soon, right?
I'm still not sure how you can apply an NFT to a spirit anyway.
A bottle that you can't have your hands on, but it's stored away somewhere. Why not just buy the damn bottle and be done with it?
Thank you.
I do have a complete side note there for a concept for art. That's an NFT, and I think that can be legitimate. But bottle's a different story.
Connor O'Hare wants to know if your whiskeys are available in Ireland.
Not at the moment, unfortunately, and
not by legal means.
Yeah, we do some exporting, but most of the export business that we do has started by, to Dave's point, has started by people smuggling our product into their home countries and putting it behind bars and it becoming popular there. We are still a small company and we have a difficult time getting the concentration that we need in some of the outer markets, some of our export markets, to be able to really manage those markets effectively. So we're not quite there yet, but I'd love to be. And for me, a big part of it, and probably for you as well, it's we want to have our product in a lot of places that we want to travel to. Ireland's definitely high on the list. So
I'm sure we have some folks who are interested in distributing you in Ireland. If they get in touch with me, I'll put them in touch with you.
Thank you very, very much. Definitely appreciate it.
Now, Malt Mariners points out that there is an English distillery with a very similar name. They go by St. George's Distillery, but they call their whiskey, they brand it under the English Whiskey Company, but the distillery is officially St. George's Distillery. Any relationship, any differences between the two? Why did you guys call it St. George?
Well, so 40 years ago, when Jorg founded the distillery, he wanted to have some allusion to his name in the name of the distillery, but didn't want it to be Jorg because most Americans have a very, very difficult time pronouncing his name. And someone at a restaurant had told him that he looked like St. George, and St. George was the patron saint of Freiburg, the village where Jorg grew up in the Black Forest. And so he named it St. George Spirits. We did take some pause at the English Whiskey Company and the St. George Distillery because we had been the St. George Spirits Distillery for decades before they even popped onto the scene. Aware St. George is the patron saint of several countries. I'm pretty sure that the former Soviet state of Georgia was named for St. George.
We actually just had some bottles over there with our friend Donnie Ronan, who's doing a project over there, and he said that anything that's St. George in that country, folks are really excited by it.
Yeah,
a lot of love for it.
But it's hard to argue. It's hard to try and legally come at a distillery in England, the patron saint of England being St. George, and say, no, you can't use St. George because we use it. And so what we try and do is just peacefully coexist and find real points of differentiation in the bottle.
Yep.
Our pal Chris Tadsenko down in Australia says he might have to have some of your whiskey sent to his freight forwarder in Florida. Is your stuff available in Florida?
It is indeed.
It is, and it's some of our spirits are actually available in Australia as well.
Which ones?
Baller is a good possibility. Terroir Gin was down in Australia.
Botanivore Gin down in Australia.
Yeah, Bruto might made its way down there.
I believe the California Citrus Vodka and the Green Chili Vodka are probably down there as well.
And I'll bet Absinthe also hit.
Yeah.
And I think Chris and his wife Lil are down in Brisbane. I think that's where they live. They should be able to find it in Brisbane, hopefully. If not, well, they've got that freight forwarder in Florida they can work with.
Yeah.
It gets all their bourbons to them.
Civilized enough.
I feel like when I was in Brisbane, I heard a number of folks refer to it as the Florida of Australia.
There you go.
Not going there.
I think it was these were Australians, but yeah, this was their own comment.
And Chris wants to know who your distributor is in Australia now.
It's Proof and Company.
Proof and Company.
And
I was just going to say, if you go to our website, info@stgeorgespirits.com or findmebooze@stgeorgespirits.com, we can certainly try to make an effort to help put them in touch with Proof and Company or the best retail outlets.
Yeah. And Proof's a really, really amazing small distributor.
Love them.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're great.
Well, I love being able to do real-time conversation between Australia, the Bay Area, and New Jersey here and have it all work out in real time.
You're bringing the whole world together, my friend.
Yeah. Leonardo Herrera was fortunate to grab a bottle of your Lost Lantern release, the single cask you did for them. And he wants to know if you have more plans for more single barrel releases. Seems like there may have been others in the past.
Yeah, great comment. I'm so grateful that you were able to nab a bottle of the Lost Lantern release. That was a really lovely special barrel. And Adam and Nora, who are effectively Lost Lantern, they're just wonderful human beings and wonderfully talented. And their approach to finding casks, to working with distilleries, is we don't do a lot of these projects. In part, it's because we really love and respect who they are and how they're going about this. So I don't believe I'm speaking out of turn when I say that there is another St. George Lost Lantern release in the future. And there's there's a conversation brewing for another concept with Lost Lantern as well in the future. And so they're some of our favorite folks in the whiskey community. They're doing great work. And that release was a really special. I believe it was the quickest. Their goal was for it to not sell out right away, and it sold out right away. I want to say it was over and done within 5 hours.
I think I did tasting notes for that a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if I shared them on the show or not. I'm going to have to go back and check, but I know I got a sample of that one, and I was impressed with it.
Thanks. And it's funny because we do tend to focus a lot on the things that we have labels for of our own. And there are a lot of interesting experimental barrels that we don't always go into. And when we go into those with somebody like Adam and Nora, and we're tasting, there's this instinct inside me to just say, oh, no, sorry, you can't have these. Because you go through, you taste them, and you realize you're sitting on these treasures. And it's like, okay, all I want to do, it doesn't fit into our regular lot series. It's not going to go into Baller. Let's just bottle this and keep it at our houses and share it with our friends. And I actually really appreciate Adam and Nora keeping me from being an even bigger alcoholic, as well as giving things like this that don't fit into our other programs a great platform to be able to get to other people. I mean, one barrel is not enough of a whiskey for us to be able to get out to even a single distributor. And even our distributor in Rhode Island, that wouldn't be enough for that distributor.
It's one of the hardest things for us, is that sense of we could release a single barrel of whiskey and we're going to make more people upset than we ever made happy.
Right. More enemies than friends.
It's really frustrating.
And if you can't tell by now, both Dave and I, when we were in high school, we were the nerdy outcast kids. We'd get our butts kicked at lunchtime, and the cool kids would steal our lunch money. And this is now our time to be able to make friends through things like whiskey. And so
makes those high school reunions a lot more fun, doesn't it?
I did a Navy reunion for the Enterprise Nuclear Power Department here at the distillery. That was a lot of fun. But again, the whole goal here is to make more friends than enemies. And so letting Lost Lantern be the ones who take the heat for only having X number of bottles, we'll do that all day.
There's still one of the casks, and it's to that same note though, where you go out and you taste casks, and it's kind of like there's a sense of, oh my god, this is beautiful. It has no place in these existing programs, but this is a really interesting experiment. I know that there's a few casks, one in particular out there, that almost every time I talk to Adam, he's still kicking himself for not getting. There was one that was it was too weird and out there, and at the same time, it's like he and Nora kind of commented on, like, that's the one that got away from us. Like, we should have nabbed it.
Well, Leonardo says his thanks for not being selfish with that one.
So Leonardo, one of the things that's a really important point here is that distillation is part of a conversation. And if we don't send those bottles out, we're just talking to ourselves all day. A big part of this is sharing. We want to be able to put something out in front of you. And the thing that's been the hardest, I know that a lot of people have had really horrible times during this pandemic. I know that it's been horrible because people have lost loved ones. I've been very, very fortunate in as much as my worst part of that whole experience is being kept away from the people that we share spirits with. And that is bad enough for me because I love being able to pour a glass of something, put it in front of somebody and watch their expression. And part of this is about the process because we do enjoy the process, but the other part of it is about sharing and that part of the conversation. Leonardo, happy to be able to let this stuff escape the shop.
You guys don't run a tasting room, do you?
We did,
or at least not right now.
Not right now.
Yeah, not right now. During the pandemic and given just so many uncertainties, we didn't feel like we could provide the sort of hospitality that we really want to share with our consumers. And so we're not currently running a tasting room. And at some point here, we'll bring that back and in a real effort to create that sort of connection, that hospitality. We've got some experiences where we've been I speak for myself. I've been really grateful to go into a bar, a restaurant, to have an experience. It's an opportunity to share spirits, but also to share community. And right now, it's not something that we can do in a way that we would celebrate. Eventually, we will bring that back in a way that we can feel really proud of and celebrate. Because ultimately, every spirit that we make is not one for a demographic; it's one for ourselves. But selfishly, it's one that we want to share at our table with our friends and family. And if other people like them, we're really grateful for it, and we try to make more to share it with more people. If no one else likes it, we're still going to make it. We'll just make less of it. And I think we kind of approach the idea of hospitality and having people come out to our distillery, to our home, in that same way, where we want to make sure that we're sharing an experience that if no one else shows up, but this is what I would want to spend my Saturday doing, and I want my friends and family here. That's kind of the goal for us always, that we keep coming back to, is to make that sort of personal experience and just expand on it.
So it's just going to be oysters and martinis.
And champagne.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
And grilled cheese.
Ooh, grilled cheese.
Ooh. So, Dave, what did your brother say the first time he tasted one of your whiskeys?
It's a great question. I think he gave me some guff for it. He was, and he's a wonderfly talented blender in his own right with wines. So he would certainly not be pulling any punches on that. But I also know that there's a lot of love and respect and appreciation for. I would not be at St. George today. I would not have the brother and Lance that I have today. I would not be who I am if not for my brother Matt, and for working with him in the winery and having an opportunity.
You'd be living in a van down by the river.
Down by the river.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done anything I've done today. I wouldn't be where I am by any stretch if not for the time and energy that my brother invested in me and took care of me. I was an English major coming out of college, and started working in the winery with him. And just got a taste of fermentation sciences and fell in love with it. Knew just enough to be dangerous, and was fortunate enough to get an opportunity at St. George. I thought my first goal was simply to work here for a year and learn about it and write about it. And that was 17 years ago. I just fell down the rabbit hole and fell in love with it.
Well, congratulations on 40 years, guys, and 20 years of making single malts.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for giving us an hour of your time tonight that you'll never get back.
I don't want it back.
That's our Happy Hour Live webcast from last Friday night, February 18th, 2022, with Lance Winters and Dave Smith of St. George Spirits in Alameda, California. This week, my guest will be Dr. Don Livermore, the master of all things whiskey at the Hiram Walker Distillery in Windsor, Ontario. Hope you can join us starting at 5 p.m. New York time on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you have comments on this or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Thanks again to Dewar's and Redbreast, our presenting sponsors, along with the Dalmore, Catoctin Creek, Mortlock, Sagamore Spirit, Scarabus, and Writer's Tears, the segment sponsors on our flagship WhiskyCast podcast each week. Coming up on the next episode of WhiskyCast, I'll be talking with George McNeil, the new chairman of the Spirit of Speyside Festival. The festival is returning to its traditional time slot at the end of April, following 2 years of pandemic-related disruptions. WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.